My knife was already on the wrong wire when I felt my partner's airline go slack behind me. 40 feet down, zero visibility, and I had maybe 90 seconds to decide which one of us I was going to save first. This is the Debrief Files. Every week, we sit down with the men and women who lived through the missions. History never wrote down. No dramatization, no Hollywood ending. Just the debrief, in their own words. Tonight's guest spent 11 years as a Navy diver.
Is explosive ordnance disposal, Navy diver, attached to a joint task force running escort duty through the Strait of Hormuz. If you don't know the geography, picture a stretch of water, barely 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, with Iran on one side and Oman on the other, and roughly a fifth of the entire world's oil passing through it every single day. Tankers, warships, fishing dhows, smugglers, all of it funneled through this one bottleneck. Is all of it within range of shore batteries and fast attack boats that could be on top of you in minutes. I want you to understand what that does to a person's nervous system. Before I tell you what happened, is you don't relax in the strait. You don't sleep the way you sleep anywhere else. Every radar contact matters. Every unscheduled maneuver from a nearby vessel matters. And when you're the guy whose entire job is finding and diffusing the things designed to sink ships quietly, the mines is the limpet charges bolted to a hull in the dead of night. You carry that tension in your shoulders for the whole deployment. Is people who've never served in a strait like that one always ask me the same question. What does it actually feel like sitting on a ship in water that narrow, that contested? Is, and the honest answer is that it feels like living inside a held breath. You get used to the rhythm of it after a while, the same way you get used to any chronic thing. But it never goes away completely. Is the captain checks the surface picture every few minutes. The bridge watch stands a little straighter near shore-facing windows. Is even the mess deck conversations change tone when you're in the narrows. Quieter, shorter, more people eating alone with a book instead of talking. Nobody says it out loud, is, but everybody's running the same math in the back of their head. How many minutes of warning would we actually get if something happened right now? I'd been doing this work for almost 9 years by the time this happened. I want to be clear about that, because what I'm about to describe isn't a story about a rookie making a mistake. It's a story about what happens when experience runs headfirst into something it can't control. We got the call at 0340. Is a merchant tanker under Allied escort, I won't name her, had reported unusual sonar returns near her waterline during a routine hull inspection. Nothing dramatic, no explosion, no impact. Is nothing you'd notice unless you were specifically looking. Just a shape that didn't belong there, tucked up under the curve of the hull near the engine spaces, roughly 8 meters below the surface. Is, in my line of work, a shape that doesn't belong there is the single most dangerous sentence in the English language. My dive partner that night was a second-class petty officer named Okafor. Danny is, to everyone who knew him, he was younger than me, maybe 6 years into his own EOD training, but he was one of the calmest hands I'd ever worked with underwater. And in this job, is calm is worth more than talent. Talent panics sometimes. Calm doesn't. We suited up on the fantail while the tanker held position and the escort ship threw a security perimeter around both vessels. Is I remember the water that night being unusually still on the surface, which almost made it worse. Because still water in the strait usually means something's wrong with the weather moving in, and that kind of stillness makes the dark feel heavier than it is. Danny didn't say much while we checked each other's gear. He never did before a dive like this one. Some divers talk through their nerves, crack a joke, run their mouth about nothing in particular, just to hear a voice. Danny went the other way. He got quiet, methodical, checking my regulator twice, even though he'd check it a dozen times before on a dozen other dives. I remember him tapping my shoulder once, just once, before we rolled off the platform. No words, just a tap. That was his version of saying, "We've got this." We went down together. Visibility was maybe 2 feet if that. Silt. Engine runoff is the usual soup you get near a tanker hull that's been sitting still in shallow water. We worked by feel more than sight, which is standard for us. But standard doesn't mean comfortable. You're running your hands along a hull the size of a city block in pitch black, waiting to touch something that might be built to kill you the second you touch it wrong. Danny found it first. A limpet mine, magnetic, the size of a large dinner plate, clamped just below the waterline near a support strut. Not a leftover from some old conflict. This one was new, recently placed, which meant somebody had been in this water very recently, and possibly wasn't far away. I want to slow down here, because this is the part people always ask about. What does it actually feel like? Physically, to have your hand on something like that. It's not fear the way people imagine fear. It's not your heart hammering and your mind screaming to swim away. It's the opposite. Everything gets very quiet inside your head. Your training takes over your hands before your brain finishes catching up. You start running the checklist automatically. Type of device, parent trigger mechanism, timer, or remote detonation. Is there a secondary charge? Is there a booby trap on the primary? Your hands are doing this, while some small, distant part of your mind is still standing off to the side, watching, thinking, "This is real, this is happening, don't get this wrong." I ran my fingers along the casing and found what I was afraid I'd find, a timer. Ticking down is mechanically simple, but wired to a secondary charge that would trigger if we tried the standard removal method. Somebody had built this specifically to kill divers who knew what they were doing. That's a particular kind of cruelty in this trade. It means whoever placed it expected professionals to find it and built it to punish exactly the response we'd been trained to give. Danny signaled the timer reading to me on his dive slate. Under 6 minutes, 6 minutes to identify a wiring configuration we'd never seen in training, in zero visibility, holding position against a light current without triggering a secondary charge that would take out the hull, the tanker, and both of us along with it, This is the part where I have to tell you about the wires. There were 2 leads running from the timer housing into the main charge. One red-jacketed. One a faded black that had clearly been stripped and retaped in the field, which told me whoever built this wasn't working from a factory kit. This was hand-assembled, which meant the standard color logic I'd trained on for years might not apply. Red doesn't always mean what red is supposed to mean when a person builds a device by hand under pressure, in secret, possibly by lantern light on the back of a small boat. I had a decision window of maybe 90 seconds to make the actual cut, once I'd traced both leads back to confirm which one fed the primary detonator and which one fed a decoy circuit built purely to kill anyone who guessed wrong. That's the moment my hand was on the wrong wire. I want to be honest with you, because that's the whole point of sitting down for something like this. I had my clippers on the black lead. Every instinct built over 9 years of training told me the black lead was the decoy. The trap wire is the one somebody hand tapes onto a device, specifically because they know a diver's muscle memory will reach for the safe-looking one first. I was seconds from cutting it. That's when Danny's hand closed around my wrist in the dark. He couldn't talk to me underwater, except through slate and signal. but I felt him pull my hand off the black lead and guide it, hard, toward the red one instead. I didn't understand why in the moment. I just felt the certainty in his grip, the kind of certainty you don't argue with when someone spent as many hours in the water with you as Danny had spent with me. I trusted him. I moved my clippers to the red lead, and that's when his airline snagged, somewhere behind me, in the current we hadn't accounted for, the umbilical. Connecting Danny's air supply had drifted into a tangle of loose cable, hanging off a maintenance strut we hadn't seen in the silt. I felt it before I fully understood it. The sudden absence of his hand still steadying mine, the shift in the water pressure around us as he twisted, trying to free himself, I had maybe 40 seconds left on that timer, a wire in my clippers that I now believed was the correct one because of a decision Danny had made for me in the dark. And my partner, fighting a snagged line 8 feet behind me, with his air supply compromised. I want you to sit with that for a second, because that's the actual weight of this job that people never see in the recruiting posters. It's not the mine. The mine is just physics and chemistry, It's the moment where the job asks you to choose between finishing the thing you were sent down here to finish and turning around to help the person who just saved your life. I made the cut. I want to say I agonized over it, that I weighed the tanker's crew against Danny's life in some careful moral calculation, but that's not how it happened, My hands finished the job because that's what 9 years of training had built into me. You complete the disarm, because a live device left half-finished is more dangerous than one you never touched, The timer stopped with 4 seconds showing on the readout. I don't know if that number was accurate or if the mechanism was already failing. I've never let myself find out, The second the charge was confirmed. Inert, I turned and swam for Danny. He'd freed most of the tangle himself by the time I reached him, but his line had kinked hard enough to restrict his air, and by the time I got a hand on his shoulder, his movements had gone slow and wrong, in a way that every diver learns to recognize and fear, the early signs of a man running out of oxygen and trying not to show it, I cleared the last of the snag, checked his regulator, and we surfaced us together slower than either of us wanted to. Because coming up too fast after a dive like that carries its own risks, We broke the surface into floodlights, and shouting and hands pulling us up onto the recovery boat, and somebody was already telling us. The tanker's captain wanted to shake our hands personally, and all I could think about, sitting there with my mask still fogged and my hand shaking, for the first time all night, was Danny's grip on my wrist in the dark, and the 4 seconds on that timer, and the fact that I had chosen the mission over him for the length of 1 full minute and never once told him that out loud. I did tell him, eventually. Years later, actually, at a reunion neither of us expected to attend. I told him I'd finished the wire before I came back for him, and that I'd never been sure if that was the right call, or just the only call my training had left me capable of making. He didn't say much. He just nodded and said he'd have done the same thing, and that was the end of it. Divers don't talk about this stuff the way other people expect us to. We just carry it. I think about that 6-minute window more than almost anything else from my time in service. Not because it was the most dangerous mission I ran. It wasn't, not by a wide margin, but because it's the clearest memory I have of what this job actually costs. It's not the fear in the moment. You're too busy for fear in the moment. It's the quiet afterward, replaying the decision you made when there wasn't time to make it properly, and wondering for the rest of your life whether you'd make it the same way twice. I retired a few years after that deployment. Danny's still in last I heard, training the next generation of divers to trust their hands in the dark the way he once guided mine. People ask me sometimes if I'd do it differently. Given the chance to relive those 6 minutes with a clearer head, and I always tell them the same thing. There was no clearer head available that night. There isn't one available in the moment for anybody who's ever had to make that kind of call. You don't get the version of yourself who's had time to think it through. You only get the version who's had 9 years of training and 40 seconds to use it. What I carry now isn't guilt, exactly. It's closer to a permanent awareness of how thin the margin actually was between a tanker crew going home to their families, and a young petty officer running out of air behind me while I finished a job the training said I had to finish first. Both of those things were true at once. I've made peace with that. Mostly, but peace isn't the same as forgetting. Some nights I still feel that grip on my wrist, not as a nightmare, just as a memory that never fully lets go. The reminder that somewhere under the water off a coastline, most people will never think twice about. A couple of tired divers once had less than 100 seconds to decide who lived, and got it right by less margin than anyone will ever know. That's the job. Nobody sees it. Nobody's supposed to. You just go home, if you're lucky, and you carry the 6 minutes with you for the rest of your life.